Thank you, Dan, very much. Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming. For many of you on your lunch hour, I'm Dr. Scott Sells, and it's just a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm part of the therapist trauma community. And so, starting this week, each week I'm going to be presenting topics on family trauma solutions. And today, of course, we're doing family trauma solutions on how to work with extreme disrespect. And this is something my life's work. I started the family trauma work where years ago I saw this gap. I don't know if you've seen this as well. I saw that there was so much out there for working with the individual that was traumatized, but I was surprised at the low number of books and research articles on going from the traumatized child to the traumatized family. And so as a result, I went back to the drawing board and did a 10-year research study and wanted to share just a little background on where this comes from, and then just jump right into solutions that you can use immediately for working with kids that have extreme disrespect as a problem. So thank you for coming. And then we'll go 30 minutes, and then I'll leave time for some Q&A. And throughout our work today, you can ask questions at any time. So just the background, this resulted in the book Treating the Traumatized Child, which we'll be talking about tools from this. And in the last couple of years, I created the Family Trauma Institute, which moved to the FST Family Systems Trauma Model. And this mission of my work is to help you become an expert at family trauma, because like I said, I think there's a real gap. So type in, if you wouldn't mind, in the chat bar, if you agree that this is a real timely issue today. And what I mean by that, the time is now, is that, have you seen what I've seen? That if there was disrespect in the family between a child or a teenager, the stress that COVID brought and all the political changes and everything that's happened has amplified that. So what I've seen more and more is what we're going to talk about today is interactional trauma. Drama equals trauma. And some of the symptoms I'm seeing around disrespect is anxiety that's skyrocketing, threats or acts of suicide, violence, and extreme disrespect. So certain symptoms get worse in times of stress. And these symptoms, which include disrespect, and I see some of you are definitely saying yes to this. So I think this is such an important topic today. So when you leave today, I want to give you 3 tools that I'd like you to try out immediately and see how they work. First, knowledge is empowering, I think. So what causes disrespect, but looking at it from a family systems trauma lens. I want to talk about some of the research that we've found out where parents told us there was something called interactional trauma, not just event-based trauma. And what we see is like just a huge thing in our research where parents and kids love the idea of undercurrents. What are the root causes of the disrespect? And you'll receive a handout today in your chat bar that Allison, who's working with me today, fielding your questions, called The Misuse of Power. And if you're inspired today and go, I want to go deeper on this, I'll share with you a clear call to action, because actually this Thursday, I'm going to do a 3-hour CE intensive on this topic. And so I'm going to give a nice overview of some of the highlights and then talk about where we're going to go deeper on this coming Thursday. So let me get a quick poll. How many of you feel that treating disrespect is one of the most challenging problems to treat. How many of you think that disrespect? So Jessica said yes. Okay. Diane said yes. Kate said yes. How many of you think that disrespect is one of the most challenging? And Angela just said yes. Okay. This for me, and Rebecca, thank you as well. So I'm going to share with you one theory or hunch I have about why disrespect is one of the toughest problems to treat when we work with kids or teenagers. So let me share with you what I think is one reason. There's many more, but here's one. So the question is, why is this so tough? When I look at more traditional ways of treating extreme disrespect with families and kids, I see a lot of times we're looking at some folks focus on a chemical imbalance, more of a cognitive approach, or an individual focus, which doesn't really involve the family in a very intentional way. But look at the DSM diagnosis for oppositional defiant. These behaviors last at least 6 months. Anger, irritability, loses temper. Defiant, argues with authority, blames others. Vindictiveness, and it could be mild, moderate, or severe. What you see in these behaviors is interactional. I can't be oppositional by myself. I'm oppositional with my teacher. I'm oppositional with my parents. I'm oppositional with other adults. So this problem of disrespect begs for family systems work. I'll share with you a quick story. My first job was as a school counselor at an alternative school. I still to this day don't know how this is supposed to work, where you put all the kids together with extreme behavior disorders around disrespect and other issues. But be that as it may, I try to treat the problem with anger management tools, and it went well. I enjoyed helping the kids with something called a hassle log to help them cognitively know when they're losing control of their anger. And there were reports by the teachers that the kids were able to have some self-regulation. But every time the kids would go back for summer school or summer, when they return, many of them would go back to status quo. So I began to see early on, without anybody telling me, that the whole was greater than the sum of the parts. So then when I would bring parents in, I didn't know what to do with them. And so all hell broke loose. So what happened was I'd bring a parent in or parents in with the kids. I'd ask, what's the goals of why we're here? And they would just point fingers, start yelling at each other. So family therapy scared me to death. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way I do. So I was like, I'm never going to do that again. So I actually went back to graduate school and said, look, I've got to work with families. I don't know how to. I'm a social worker. I should know how, but I was scared. So what I want to share with you now is some of the revelations I found over the years of looking at extreme disrespect from a family systems lens and how it was a game changer. And I had to do it afraid, because when I got out of graduate school, I had to go back to working with families. And this time it went a lot better. Okay. So let me share with you this part here. So here, the more non-traditional approach was interactional family systems driven by undercurrents. And the first thing that I saw disrespect was now from more of a systems lens. And here's what it looked like: the perfect storm. There was an upside down hierarchy. So I started looking at the work by Mnuchin and Haley, Structural Strategic. And that made so much sense to me, because the kids were in charge of the household, not the parents. And that caused a lot of the symptoms around disrespect, aggression, etc. But it also created what was called interactional trauma. Many of you have heard this term, drama equals trauma. And that happened a lot. And then over the years, with the publication of this book, we discovered what I call kind of like the Rosetta Stone. It became clear that families would do better if we could help them see what's the root cause of the disrespect, because families would come into treatment with this mantra: just fix my kids. This is an individual problem. In fact, if I could, I'd like to send my child to residential treatment or put them on probation. The key was, how could we start to move the parents in thought and heart to looking at this more from a family solution, not just a kid, let's fix the kid problem. So let's start with upside down hierarchy. Here's what we found with the family systems trauma model that I'm presenting today: that the child or teen was up here, the parent or caregiver was here, and what we saw was an imbalance of a hard side of hierarchy or a soft side of hierarchy. We would ask the question, who controls the mood of your household? Now, why this was so important was that balance in all things. So what would happen would be is some families would have an over preponderance of, we love our kids, but we don't like them anymore. So they would say, look, we don't have any real relationship with them. And so they had the hard side of hierarchy where they had no limits and the kids would be out of control. On the other side, they wanted to be their kid's best friend. And so there was absolutely no limits, or there was no attachment. We saw that extremes were producing dysfunction. And one of the questions that is a takeaway for today is just ask your parents or caregiver, who controls the mood of the household? It didn't matter if they were 3 or 33, because when the parent said, yes, this child controls the mood of the household, we have to accommodate, we saw an upside down hierarchy. And so this was a really important revelation for working with families, because we're starting to get more to the root. The second thing we saw is that we saw an imbalance of love and limits. If we did not help fix this problem, the symptoms of disrespect, aggression, anxiety would continue to go on and on. And here's the problem. The longer this went on, the more the parent and child started to unforgive one another. The longer this went on, it started with resentment. And then the longer this went on, it went into bitterness. When you start to have a parent and child that are calcified around bitterness, you have trauma of epic proportions. It also created what was called parent abuse or teen terrorism. If you would mind putting in your chat bar if you've seen this phenomenon, where some kids will say they'll use the extreme behaviors like disrespect or aggression to scare the parents into submission or giving up their authority. In other words, kids would tell us, as you've seen, that they want structure. But what happens is they haven't had structure in so long that they don't know what it's like to be a kid. So I've had kids actually tell me, if you try to change my parents and put limits down, I know exactly how to get back to status quo. I just have to increase the intensity and they'll be scared and back down. And Kate says, I've seen this. Angelina said 100%. And this is why this makes this problem so difficult? Because kids have no qualms to increase the intensity of their behavior because they don't know what it's like to be a kid again. I remember working with people that have substance abuse, and I say to them the question, when did you start, using drugs? So I have a 33-year-old person in my office, and that person might say, yeah, I started at 12. Well, what happens, and I don't know if you've seen this, but their emotional development stopped at 12. I see this happening with kids. When I have extreme behaviors and I have to use all my psychic energy to figure out how I can maintain the upside down hierarchy, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not thinking about like going on dates. I'm not thinking about, my first job, fast food or whatever it is. I'm constantly thinking, what can I do to keep charge of the household? So emotionally, their development stops. This is why when you change the hierarchy, you'll see that the kids' acne clears up. They feel at peace. But you have to tell the parents this. If I'm going to come in, and I'm going to show you how to do this in just a second, and if I'm going to be what's called a systems irritant, and I'm going to actively restructure the family like a chiropractor that has a back out of alignment, the child will get worse before they get better. And you say to the parent, this is normal. They'll go into like DTs, like they'll have the shakes. And it's scary for parents. So if you don't forewarn them, and when you start to realign the structure using what's called undercurrents, which I'm going to show you in a moment, it's going to be very, very difficult. So let's go to the undercurrents, because once you kind of know that this can happen, the question is, now what? So let's go to the interactional trauma, because this has what's called the perfect storm written all over it. So as far as I know, we were the first to coin this term in traumatology, interactional trauma. The term that most of us are familiar with is event-based trauma. These are traumatic events that don't heal on their own. They can be extreme, like domestic violence, the parents unable to show love, there's loss of a loved one, there can be sexual abuse, grief, and the idea time heals all wounds does not happen in these families. They're stuck on the event. The other one, though, that you're going to see is constant arguing and fighting, or drama equals trauma. So what happens is that when there's no stopping the lectures, the yelling, the screaming, which has been accelerated with COVID. I can't tell you how many parents are saying, like, I can't take this cabin fever. I can't take the kids being home all the time and not going to school. So this interactional trauma just explodes, okay? And this produces trauma. So in the intensive this Thursday that I'm doing, I'm going to be showing you cases like this, where this is Rebecca, who is 16 years old. And when the father got the hierarchy issue where he said, I can see it. And I said, I'm going to be a systems irritant and a coach, and I'm going to give you limits because Rebecca hasn't had limits. When I did role plays with the father to prepare, when Rebecca comes in, you're going to see, if you attend this intensive, that as soon as the father puts limits, because there's no hard side of hierarchy, and ironically, the father is in the military, all hell breaks loose. And you're going to see that this model is a model of action in the here and now. And what happened here is Rebecca is here, and I have to help as a coach fill in what's missing, because they're not going to wake up one day by osmosis and the father is going to be like, gee, I need some hard side of hierarchy. That's what's driving Rebecca's disrespect. I was always taught that if the family could unstick themselves, they wouldn't be in your office. And a term that sometimes is used is that Rebecca, a reframe it's called, was suffering from limit deprivation. Now, this was huge for the father because he had had a theory or hunch that Rebecca's extreme disrespect was a chemical imbalance, but there was not evidence to show that. And she had been in hospitals, she had been in individual therapy. And I said to the father, if it's not working, can we do something different? So he had to do this as an experiment. And you're going to see if you attend the intensive that the father has this light bulb experience through faking it till he makes it, where his cognitions change when he actually sees for himself this play out. And so this is the handout that I gave this family, the father specifically, and Rebecca was involved in it too. And this is where Allison will put this on in your chat bar. And I want you to consider experimenting with this immediately to see for yourself if the parents really, or caregiver says, thank you, because it's been a game changer. It's undercurrents. So we hand this handout to the parent and the older teenager because we say to the teenager, we're not picking on you. Our frame is that you're creative and adaptive. And so the question is, we can't change the past. What are we going to do in the here and now? So we say that there's this misuse of power seed. And we say that, this is happening when the child or teenager is in control of the household through behaviors like disrespect, violence, running away. And they actually want to force you to give authority over to your child. The hierarchy is upside down. And adults can also misuse power by being emotionally or physically abusive. So we say to the family, let's get to the undercurrents. This is often not seen by the naked eye. And the father in this case says, yep, I have empty threats. Yep, I have inconsistent discipline. Yep, there's a lack of nurturance because of the drama of yelling. Yep, there's button pushing. Yep, there's lack of clear boundaries. So what happens here, and you're going to see this, is you start to see a phenomenon called externalizing the problem. This is a game changer because now the focus is on the seed and the undercurrent instead of the child. I've had kids actually say to me, thank you, Scott. I came in here, and they don't use this word, I've been the symptom bearer. And you've expanded the symptom, they don't say this, but this is implied, away from me to this seed and the undercurrents. And so it's really important to externalize the problem from a child only to a family system solution. How many of you think that that's important for our work? What do you guys think? Do you think that externalizing the problem is an important move in our work with families where they come in saying, just fix my kid, to, oh my gosh, I can see that the problem is that we have to fix this seed that I even say it's got its own bedroom in the house. So this is such an important piece. So then where you hope will happen is when you ask these questions at the end of this handout. Let me show you this here. And then we'll take questions at the end. This is where you hope that the family will say, are any of the child's current problems of disrespect caused by this misuse of power seed? Yes or no? And do you say or do anything that helps your child misbehave or continue their disrespect? These questions are moving the problem focus from a child only to a family solution, interactional. And so the father had all 5 of these. And this produces interactional trauma, tension, arguments, button pushing, things of that nature. So as we move to a close today, and then I want to take some questions from you guys. One of my calls to action is to give this a try. Tomorrow, if you can, where you hand out this handout and you'll watch the reaction and look for these success milestones. People will be like, I never thought of it this way before. I like the undercurrents, or what's the root, because I say we could do weed work all day. We could just focus on the symptoms, but all we're doing is pulling weeds. And what if we don't get to these roots? We call this second order change versus first order change. First order change is defined in family therapy as once they're done with treatment, they go back to the same old behaviors. Second order change is that you look at these undercurrents and you put the exact opposite in, and it becomes the family's new normal, where they don't have empty threats anymore. They have consistent discipline. They have consistent nurturance. They have anti-button pushing strategies. They have clear boundaries, and they adopt those as the new normal. So long after treatment's over, there's a stickiness factor. And so if you want to go deeper in this particular topic, I just want to show you, and Allison will put this on, is please consider saving the date for Thursday, this Thursday from 9 to 12. You can attend live or on demand. And so you'll see that in this agenda, I just want to kind of give just a brief overview of how we're going to pivot from this overview to go to a deep dive. It's going to be 9 to 12, and there will be 3 CE credit hours. And you just click the registration here, or you would just go to familytrauma.com and you would see this, scroll down a little bit, and you'll see this, and enroll now. Now, I really wanted to keep the costs down because I wanted as many people to attend this as possible. Live is going to be great if you can come, because there's going to be a lot of interaction. On the last one I did, which was anxious parents, anxious kids, there was just a lot of interaction where people took their mics off. We had fun. A lot of videotapes I will also show as well. And we're gonna continue. I'm gonna show this case, and we're gonna kind of dissect it together of what that you can replicate these steps with your family. And we're going to get into what's called healthy undercurrents. So I'm going to show you during that intensive of how to take the family from empty threats to no empty threats, inconsistent discipline to the opposite, consistent, and so on. Families will be like, this is what they need and they want, is to answer the question, okay, this is great insight, Scott. Now what? What are you going to give me in the here and now to help me put in these healthy undercurrents? And so you'll walk away with the first step is how to even motivate the parent to show up and cooperate, because they're burnt out by this point. How to use a technique called the C-tree technique and the playbook to get to not only the root causes, but like I said, how do you put those healthy undercurrents in? And then how do you change the disrespect dance between parent and child, or child and teacher? Because you have to give these families dress rehearsals, because they've had generational trauma. And you just can't expect them to go into a conflictual situation and stop interactional trauma on a dime. And then there's going to be a lot of in-depth Q&A. My workshops or webinars are designed to really get to the tools and then to use them the next day. So, and next Friday, and every week after that, I'll be presenting a new topic. This was just Monday because of the intensive webinar this week. But next week, I'm going to be talking about how to engage the extended family. So I hope that you'll come to that one if you like today. So let me ask Allison if there were some questions or comments from today's overview webinar. Thank you guys too for attending today. Allison.
Yeah, so there was one question that came in about what is the difference between today's overview and the workshop that you're having this week?
Yeah, one is, this is, like I said, an overview of like the theory, and then the intensive is application, because I believe that in order for us to really work well with tough families, we need the trauma informed, and then we need to move to trauma responsive. So the biggest difference is today was an overview of the why, and Thursday will be an in-depth dive of the how. So that's the biggest difference. Any other questions?
Okay. When there is interactional trauma between parent and child that causes disrespect, how do you stop it?
Yeah, one of the things I'll be talking about Thursdays is called button busters. Families don't know how to stop it. Like, one of the buttons that is pushed is parents take it very, very personal, and their judgment clouds. I went to Toys R Us as an experiment when Toys R Us was still around, and I used to see kids as young as 3 demand a toy, and the parent would say no, and the kid would start screaming, and you could see the parents' age drop. Like they started at maybe 30, and I looked at my watch, right? And I'd be like, okay, 2 more minutes, their age dropped to 20. And then 2 more minutes, it dropped down to 10. And sometimes the child would look at me mischievously when they went to the checkout counter with the toy in their hand. I learned very early that we have to give parents anti-button pushing strategies to stop interactional trauma. And it goes both ways, because not only do kids push their parents' buttons, but the parents have to take ownership of how they push their kids' buttons. One parent I remember just talked in chapters. Like, instead of saying, like, take out the garbage, they'd say, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. So you have to teach the parents how to stop pushing their kids' buttons. Ergo interactional. It takes 2 to tango. So when you attend that intensive, you'll walk away with button busters. So I love that word. So any other questions?
Yes. Do you have experience working with families with developmental disabilities, and will you talk about how to use this with those families?
Yes, the key with the kids that have autism or developmental disabilities is there's still extreme disrespect, but the key is oftentimes working through the parents. What happens a lot of times is that before I see a family, they've been to 4 or 5 other counselors and it hasn't worked out. I will say to them, like, right now, can I give you tools to help your child's disrespect, but also look at their developmental levels, and we have to change the interventions to fit where they are developmentally. One size doesn't fit all. So one of the things that this model, family systems trauma model, does is, the key is oftentimes the child gets the family in the door, but the tools are really designed to help the parents. As long as the parents are focused on the kid, I've had parents say to me, wow, we had to change just as much as our kids, but you were very intuitive that you had to go through the back door to get to the front door. So you will see, yes, how to work with these tools based on children that can either participate or not participate in treatment. Great question.
And then there's another question. Do you have experience working with this with foster and adoptive parents?
This model particularly works well with this because what you're going to see is one of the families that will be highlighting. They're dealing with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the family that you'll see is the risk of removal is due to the fact that the mom does not have the ability to keep the utilities going and the child has no bed to sleep on. So one of the things that you'll also see is that disrespect is often fueled by a lack of a support village. So this mother is extremely depressed because she has no one to help her. And so one of the things you'll see in the video is how I will come in and bring the pastor, the boyfriend, the biological father, the counselor in a town meeting, and the undercurrent is food, clothing, and shelter. So you might think of disrespect as just like, oh, obviously it's going to be the conflict. Well, disrespect is also fueled by lack of stability, chaos, and disorganization. So you're going to see that this particular approach really works with it, because once you know where to tap, in terms of what's driving the disrespect at the surface, then you go for that. And then it can be more brief and strategic because you now use the undercurrents as your lighthouse in the storm. So if you are interested in how this approach can work with this group, which is very, very tough, it definitely has a lot of pros to it as well. Great question. Any others?
Yes. Earlier you described or you used the term limit deprivation. Could you expand on this term some more?
Yeah, it was a term that made folks laugh a lot of times. They're going to have an aha moment where it's a reframe. It's so much easier to help a family where you either the reframe is my kid is bad, or is it a better reframe my kid is really sad? In this case, is it better to label the kid with a DSM diagnosis of conduct disorder, opposition defiant disorder, which limits the ability to move, or to say that your child is suffering from limits deprivation, where they have not had limits in a long time? That makes the ability with that reframe to say, I never thought of it that way before. So instead of seeing the child as mean-spirited or a bad seed, they now focus on the driver, which is a lack of limits. And so it softens things up. And once you have a better reframe, it can move stuck families a lot further, because when they come in, you can't do much with a label like, well, he's just mean-spirited. There's nothing we can do about it. But when you say, no, there's limits that haven't been there. I never thought of it that way before. So that gives you a new undercurrent and new pathway for success. Yeah, great question. Any final questions before we wrap up today?
Sure, there's one last question. What did you mean exactly when you said that parents love their kids but don't like them anymore?
Yeah, it's just I love the term that I've seen over the years is rules without relationships lead to rebellion. And think about that. Rules without relationships lead to rebellion. So I asked parents a diagnostic question early in treatment, who controls the mood of the household? But equally important, I want you guys to consider asking your family, do you love your kids? Yes, but do you like them anymore? What that tells you is that if you only focus on tough love or boundary setting and you don't restore lost nurturance, then the child is not going to change permanently because there's no relationship. And so disrespect is one of the number one poisoners of attachment, because the parents are putting out fires, they're angry, they take it very personal, and it goes both ways. And so rules without relationships lead to rebellion. I hope you like that one because it's a diagnostic test that you have to have a soft side of hierarchy and a hard side of hierarchy. And Thursday we'll be driving deep into, you might have to stop the bleeding or stabilize, but how are you going to restore lost attachment? Because if you don't do both, you're going to have no permanent change. So thank you everybody for today's mini training. I'll be answering questions on when this video is posted in our community. So feel free to just ask some more questions. Please tell colleagues if you like this. I'll see you next Friday, and I hope to see some of you on the intensive this Thursday for the disrespect deep dive. So thank you everybody for attending today, and I hope you have a great week. Bye everybody.